Welcome back to the Relearning Economics live stream. Today we're going to be doing the secret history of money. Where is it now? Where did it come from? And where's it going? I'm going to interact with my chatters today. We're going to figure this out. It's going to be fun. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so we're together forever, and comment. Comment underneath the video. Comment in the live chat. If you're on X, do the same. Hit that heart button, retweet it, repost it, whatever you want to call it. Comment and chat in the live chat. We're going to talk about the history of money today. I'm also going to cover the time I was in a bank vault. Can you believe it? A bank vault. I was in one of those things that we talk about so much that holds the thing we love, money. Anyways, how you guys doing? I think the best way going forward is we can actually talk about where money is, where it came from, and where it's going. Or we can just do a linear path. Let's do a linear path and kind of just break it down. And then we'll kind of discuss, what money is, what currency is, what money is, what credit is, because it's important depending on who you're talking to, what terminology you use. So a lot of people start with the kind of the barter story, right? So I give you some goats, and in exchange, I get some wheat from you, and the world's happy. And then after that, sometime along the way, coins were invented to make barter easy, and so we had a means of exchange. But as we know, and like with the work of David Graeber, that's not exactly the case, right? So communities relied on credit and trust, right? And social obligations. They marked those down, right? They accounted for it. And really, credit came first before anything else. And a lot of that anthropology work showed that barter itself was very rare. So it happened with distant communities, right? People that didn't have those social connections. But in the majority of situations, if we go back in history, accounting was taking place and we were using a form of credit or IOUs, right? So that kind of started, if you want to start at the beginning of money and not even worry about currency, right? If it was fiat issued or anything like that, money was credit essentially, right? And then, debt and the state came in. So as these communities grew, right, and got bigger, the first currencies came into play. So when I say currency, I'm talking about state issued money. I'm not talking about IOUs created in a private sector that's below the state, right? And they had like tablets in Mesopotamia, so tallies of debts. Ancient rulers would use it to tax, right? So they would create these coins, right? And then tax them back, right? So essentially, the tax was giving the coins a certain level of value along with their use case of being an exchange piece of material. And these could have been tally sticks, right? You look in England, you've got the tally sticks, could have been beads, right? Could have been stamped coins, silver or gold, right? And then after that, you had early commercialized credit systems, right? So this involved like religion and then the idea of usury, right? So these are early credit systems. They kind of came along in the Middle Ages, right? So the idea of charging interest was condemned by the church. You had a lot of networks employed that, right? And it started commercializing the idea of credit creation and expanding ledgers with the idea that, the people that would get credit would go out in their communities and use it in an economic sense. Of course, they didn't have economics back then, but essentially perpetuating some sort of growth or productive activity in that community, right? So you're in the Middle Ages now. Then the next big innovation um, was kind of the arrival of banking, right, and paper promises. So this kind of happened in the Renaissance, right? So you had the goldsmiths, the bankers, and they would issue notes, paper promises, redeemable for coins, gold, etc., 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 etc. Right? That's a lot of etceteras, right? Money wasn't tied to the metal itself, but to trust the institution, right, there was, a reserve of some sort of, metal, whatever the specific unit wanted to was accepted. Gold generally was that acceptance, right? It was hard to find, right? It was shiny, so people liked it, right? The wore it as jewelries, right? It was really it was a soft metal, so it could be molded into different things, right? Lasted, it didn't rust, anything like that, right? So you get to that era. So the era, the Renaissance era, banking, right? And early credit systems. Then we go into the 19th century and the gold standard, right? So people have been using gold, you know, throughout history as a means of exchange, right? A store of value. But it wasn't really formalized until, society started, formulating laws, right, around the gold standard, right? Like, this a certain amount of gold is worth a certain amount of paper currency. Um, in international trade, we would ship gold back and forth, so we had our capital flows, right? And we really started establishing an institutional system with a gold standard, which is kind of ironic, right? Because the gold standard is, propelled by libertarians as some sort of free money system that's not institutionally constrained. But in order to have a gold standard, you need institutions enforcing that standard. And this all came about in the 19th century, right? The belief that trying money as gold would make it sound. But in reality, if we look at history, it caused fragility, right? Wars, depressions, crises, yeah, like banking crisis. So the thing with gold is you can mine it and you can find it, and that'll fluctuate throughout time depending on where the deposits are, the technologies to extract the gold, but it's completely separate from economic activity, right? So you may have constraints on the ability to use gold and expand it into a credit system and then expand economic activity when it's needed because there's not enough. Or you might have a time, like for instance, when the Spanish took all the gold out of South America and flooded the European market and it completely devalued it, right? And there was no economic activity to correlate to finding these new gold deposits or, pillaging gold from other nations. And of course, that happened in South America, right? So that was kind of the gold standard, right? And then in the 20th century, you saw the shift to fiat currency, right? So fiat currency is basically let it be, right? The government creates a promissory note and says, this is redeemable for another promissory note. And guess what? You can pay your taxes in it, right? And so essentially, you now remove that constraint of digging something up in the ground, right? And you've just replaced it with a piece of paper. Now, obviously, there are constraints to that, just like there were constraints to gold, right? You can't just, make as much of these pieces of paper as you want beyond economic activity. You're going to run into inflation, right? That's Econ 101, right? And of course, that's the argument against it by Austrians and libertarians and the new Keynesian slash neoclassicals, right? That's the problem with fiat currencies is governments can't control themselves, right? Central governments would just flood the economy with money. Have we seen that? We've seen the expansion of base money but all countries do it. So relative to each other, currencies are stable, right? And we allow a floating exchange network, so the free market can, theoretically punish a currency. And of course, that's a debate in itself if that's really possible with central banks manipulating those markets. So you had the fiat age, and it was really, the peak fiat is 1971, Nixon taking everybody off the gold standard, right? So that's fiat. And we're now in a new age, and that new age is the digital age, and we're seeing the rise of things like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, right? And so now we're entering this new age of what money is and how that money could in the future become currency. So imagine the US dollar is dropped by the US government and exchanged for Bitcoin. Now, that's kind of far-fetched at this point, right? There's a lot of constraints that head in that direction, right? Ultimately, a currency issuing government doesn't want to relinquish any control over the currency it issues, right? Yeah, that goes throughout a history, whether you're stamping coins, right, with your unique signature, and you would only accept those back as tax as a government, or to fiat money, right, where you would only accept those to be paid for government fees and tax money, right? But we are in that age. So things like central bank digital currency, right? That's becoming a common topic, right? What does that mean? What does it mean going forward? So that's kind of like the history of money. And it doesn't really start with barter, right? That's a myth, right? And the great work of the legendary David Graeber kind of shows that, right? And there are detractors that say, that guy was absolutely wrong, right? And you'll hear it from the Bob Murphy Austrians out there, et cetera, et cetera. How's the chat doing, guys? That's kind of my rundown. I want to kind of interact with you guys, right? I want your opinion on what money is, what it does, and don't just give me the generalities. Oh, it's a means of exchange, it's a store of value, right? Don't give me that, right? Tell me what you think it is. Tell me where you think the history, how it came about, how it's evolving, where it's going now, right? That's kind of the topic I want to discuss today, right? So when I model money right now, I don't really get into this, right? It's not a big thing for me because I just see it as a means of exchange or a store of value. So either you're holding it, right? So it's a stock somewhere, or it's being spent. So there's a stock divided by a unit of time, right? So dimensionality here. If that's it's one of its two forms. It's either, being debited and credited, which you can look through time, or it's just a stock, it's just a collection, an accumulation of something. So I don't really care if it's gold. I don't really care if it's fiat. I don't really care if it's some digital form, right? It's They're balances, right? And they're usually denominated in the same way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So I never really get bogged down in this stuff, but it's important, right? It's important to understand that, and it kind of relates back to what I'll discuss towards the end of the stream about me being in a bank vault, right? Because that's important too, right? Tony Wilson, what do you got, Tony? Mark Blythe, boy, you are a rider of this guy. You're like part of his fan club, aren't you, Tony? You probably going to conventions getting his autograph. Mark Blythe says Bitcoin is a joke, and it's a joke if you think it's money because it's way too volatile. Yeah, there are things right now, like, so my early summary, I don't really see it as a means of exchange right now, or even a good store of value. And it's decentralized, and so for it to become a currency, that's problematic too, right? But it is on, our horizon right now in the digital world. So we have to kind of look at it, because these things, you can either think of it as the tulip craze, which I often do. I think, wow, this is going to drop like a rock soon enough, right? but I stay out of that because I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll probably give a laugh and say I told you so when it does happen. But who knows how it evolves, right? Maybe stability does come into play, right? The volatility's taken out of it and the means to use it. So the transaction value becomes very easy. And so in 10 years, we could look at it in a completely different way, right? So I'm not going to discount it completely, but at the same time, it is an evolving product out there, and it's worth taking a look at it. Alex, now what do we got here? Money keeps score against everyone else. That's all it needs to do to account for your consumption. The reason for stamping the coins was as a certificate of the amount of metal. It was a service provided to the people. So we're talking about currency right now. What else do we got? We just got Tony and Alex so far. I know this chat takes a while for people to roll in the first 30 minutes. So if you're just joining in, make sure you leave your comments. Right now, we're talking about the history of money. I named the title The Secret History of Money because we just needed to talk about it, right? And why I want to talk about it is because I want people to drop the confusing terminology. Oh, well, that's currency or that's money. And Alex kind of hit the nail on the head there, essentially with this comment. I think it was this one. Yeah. Essentially, it's an accounting scorekeep. It's a scorekeeping card, right? And that serves its use. So it could be, still as a stock. And in that case, a lot of people say, well, it's a store of wealth, right? Or it could be, circulating. And of course, it's not a real flow like water through pipes. It occurs as debits and credits through accounts through time. And in that case, it's dollars per time unit. And in that case, it's a means of exchange. And that's very much how I look at it. And I want some days when I see these discussions, and as interesting as the history is going back, to David Graeber's work and, him kind of discovering that, the initial forms of trade were through credit, right? We were doing that from the beginning, kind of like what Alex is saying, right? We were keeping accounts, right? What do you owe me, right? And those ledgers were credit in themselves, right? That's how it started. And that preceded metal, right? That preceded state governments issuing coins, right? And the story is kind of reversed. The mainstream story is we're all bartering. We had this perfect barter system, but it wasn't perfect enough, right? Because sometimes I didn't have what you needed, but you had what I needed. So the state stepped in, and lo and behold, they started stamping coins, and the world was saved. That wasn't actually what happened throughout human history, right? And that's very interesting. But when we come to today, we got to start asking ourselves, does it even matter anymore? Right? Like, we should always learn history, right? Don't get me wrong. We should always learn history because learning the history of something can be important when you're trying to figure out something else, right? Because you can understand the evolution of human behavior. So I'm not discounting that. And I love the work of David Graeber. But does it matter now, right? Especially now that we're moving in the digital age, it's so fast. Things are changing so rapidly. Does that matter, right? Because at the end of the day, we're still kind of doing what we initially did. We're just marking down assets and liabilities, right? And then we find out our equity after that. We're still doing that essentially, right? So the story's all there, and it's great as an historian, but to economics, does it matter? That's a really fundamental question. Who else is in the chat? Who we got here? Remzi? Am I spelling or is pronouncing your name yet? In capitalism, and then in brackets, game of exchanging assets for subjective values. All money is just an abstract asset. One's net worth is the sum of total assets, real and abstract, while a real assets valued in abstract values, right? This, of course, gets to the Austrian case, subjective value. And of course, I've covered this in the past, right? There's each school has a different variation on what wealth is. You can find that blog on my Patreon, patreon.com/relearning economics. So that in itself, making that comment, it's subjective, right? The idea that money is subjective. Because if that's the case, if you just postulate, value is subjective, then there's no way you can prove it. There's no discussion. It almost becomes a mythical kind of postulation. And I kind of fall under the, cost plus, value system. So Koletsky, right, basically said, to get price change and additional value, right? There's costs, right? There's a cost to it, and costs are basically supply and demand, right? And then final products is a markup, right? It's set institutionally. So there is supply and demand in the equation, but then after that, firms will put a markup on the product, and in that case, prices are set institutionally, and it's a causal loop, right? Just goes in a circle. So you'd have to put some stocks in there, right? Keynes said idle resources aren't even wealth. If they're not actually being employed, in the general economy being used, just because they're sitting there doesn't mean they have wealth. Now they are idle and they are available, and this kind of comes to the point where the government can step in, right, and spend, right, increasing aggregate demand because they're going to use some of those idle resources. So Keynes said, resources that are not doing anything they don't represent wealth. Adam Smith said, wealth doesn't happen until labor transforms the raw material into something useful, right? So there's no wealth until there's that transform. Labor adds wealth. The physiocrats before him, and I know Alex likes the physiocrats to a degree. They said that this kind of goes to the ecological point of things, that there's ecological wealth, right? So you have to account for the wealth of leaving the land pristine, right? And that is a form of wealth. You live in a pristine, environment, right? So in fact, in that case, it kind of goes against Keynes, because those are idle resources, but they're maybe not so idle for the planet and the biosphere itself, right? So talking about wealth, right, is very complicated because it's so different across all the schools. And I kind of laid that out in a blog, and I think it's important in my upcoming book. One of my initial chapters is about wealth, right, and what it is, right? And often I think wealth is a combination of all the economic schools' views on it, and none at all at the same time. And in fact, maybe the term wealth is dangerous and divisive to use unless it's a very, very narrow definition, right? And to make it narrow, you'd need agreement. And that's in this day and age is really, really complicated to get. So what else do we got? Today, I got a baseball game coming up today. So I'm only going to do about an hour-long stream. Important game. I'll let you guys know. I kind of posted this a few days ago in the community post. We're at the last game now of the season. So there's 162 games in a baseball season. And my team, the Blue Jays, the Toronto Blue Jays, the only Canadian baseball team, they're tied with the New York Yankees for the American League East Division. So you want to win your division to get to the playoffs. There are some wild card spots underneath, but getting a division title gives you a bye from the first round. Like I said, it's come down to a tie in game 162. If the Yankees lose today, we're in the playoffs. If we win today, we're in the playoffs. We hold the tiebreaker with the Yankees because we beat them in the season series. We're not playing each other. But anyways, huge. So That's why I'm only doing an hour today, okay? Because I gotta watch this game. I gotta prep for it. I gotta get, ooh, like right into it. Like, whoa, what? Woo! That's baseball. And then hockey season's starting. So I go from baseball to hockey, right? Anyways, what's Tony saying no? Tony, you're like somebody I know. No tie. Work changes the value of available resources. Wealth is just an accumulation over time. That's your definition. Trust me, you go talk to an Austrian and they'll give you a different definition. You go talk to a classical economist, they'll give you a different definition. You go talk to a physiocrat, they'll give you a different definition. This is the problem. Your definition isn't the same definition as everybody else. So just having this conversation about wealth, which I highlight in my chapter in my book, right, is counterproductive because I'm not going to change your mind. What wealth is to you is completely different to somebody else. And so in the economic calculation, it might be useless to even bring it up. Short from saying I've got a balance of currency or I've got a balance of money, and that's wealth. But that again will encounter the resistance to the Austrian theory of subjectivity, right? So it's a very complicated. No, not one person in this chat will say what wealth is, and everybody else in the chat will agree with it. There's not one version of wealth I can describe, right, that everybody in the chat will agree with. I guarantee it, right? What else we got in the chat? Have I seen you here? Am I getting your name right? It's Remzi, whatever. Who cares? Have I seen you here before? By subjective value, I mean there are no fixed values or prices. Exchange is based on power dynamics. It's impossible to know if it was an equal exchange, so one gets a good deal and the other one loses. And like I was saying earlier, out of all the theories on wealth, I think a bit of each of them make a piece of it. And in my piece that I wrote on wealth as an article, and it's on my Patreon, right? That's kind of the conclusion I came to, that if one was willing to challenge themselves, they could build a dynamic model and include all the theories, right, to make up, what wealth is, at least the behavior of it, not an empirical, a banana should be $1.50, right? Nothing like that, but maybe how the value of a banana changes over time, and could be a portion of it could be subjective value, a portion of it could be cost plus markups, right? A portion of it could be supply and demand, right? A portion of it could be credit expansion. You expand credit, right? So this is a big deal in like mortgages and Steve Keynes' work, right? You expand credit, you expand the value of houses, right? So you could tie all those things if somebody was clever enough. And it would be hard work, right? You could get a qualitative model that integrates all the different theories. Alex, physiocrats are the economists. Everything else is fairy tales. You know what? I'm going to tell you, and I agree with you, Alex. The physiocrats is kind of like pre-economics. So it's kind of just, they were around the French. So they were French economists. And then there was Adam Smith that came out, and the classical school just dominated everything. And the physiocrats, they were left behind. But if you look at the, and I forget the name, and it's famous, and I forget the French name for it, but it shows a causal loop diagram of the French economy. Of course, it was a farmer agricultural economy, right? But that was like one of the first cases of dynamics in economics, right? It was like a little system dynamic causal loop diagram, right? It's really cool. Huge respect for the physiocrats. Huge. Steve. Well, let's see what Steve's got to say. Steve's in the house. He's got his. So everybody, Steve's YouTube channel has been restored. He's no longer a Bitcoiner. He doesn't have red eyes. He is back, so his videos will be back. I think you're doing one today at 12 o'clock my time in about an hour and a half potentially. But anyways, let's see. Yes, yes, there we go. So, which is why I start from Marx's actual dialects, not from the synthesis stuff, double entry bookkeeping, the laws of thermodynamics, and macroeconomic definitions with system dynamics. So, Steve is a big fan of the physiocrats. I would know jack shit about them without Steve Keen's input about them. And so, if you look at the history, Adam Smith, in the classicals, and you had the physiocrats. Now, Steve, weren't the physiocrats a decade or so before Adam Smith's rise to prominence, or were they around the same time? Now we know the classical school dominated everything and the physiocrats were forgotten about, and in my opinion that was a step back. Even though Adam Smith is the father of economics, he actually took a step back from the physiocrats in my opinion. But were the physiocrats a decade or so, were they around before Smith's prominence, or were they around the same time? So I'm not too sure about that. Um, Deer Point. Deer Point. Hey, how you I haven't seen you in a while, Deer Point. We've been talking about money today. I don't know if you missed the beginning. Well, hope you're well. Hope the markets are treating you well, buddy. See posts from you all the time on X. I haven't seen one. It hasn't come up in my feed. The feed's been hurting me in our connection together, Deer Point. Alex. Cantillon was just before Adam Smith, I think. And I think so too. I think so too. As I recall, like looking, we've all, anybody interested in economics, up to 80 years before. Okay, there you go. So this is, again, we kind of started with the barter theory and David Graeber correcting, through evidence, saying, it wasn't the barter story to state money. It was actually credit money. So we were keeping accounts with each other, right? And that was the first form of money, right? And then state money came after. Here's another, kind of insight here. The physiocrats, and Steve's an economic historian. He's saying up to 80 years before Adam Smith and the classicals. So you could say, the physiocrats were the birth of modern economics. That's a controversial thing to say, I know. But when I look at, dynamic systems, and I see economics as a dynamic system, they kind of provided it first, right? It was abstract at the time. It was based on an agricultural economy. And of course, it's much different now, but they had the pieces in place. Steve, what are you doing? Aren't you supposed to be getting ready for a video? You're gonna put that video out, everybody. I think he's gonna have his video back. He came back as a subscriber on my channel, so you should see Steve as one of your people you subscribe to, because it automatically came back to me. It's a different picture, and actually in on my app it still shows the Bitcoin orange logo, but that's just caching on my phone. And so if you see that, it'll still say Prof Steve Keen beside it. We got a hot take here. Hot take. I've been Kadun proceeded. Now I can't say that name, but I see the name and everybody else can. Proceeded Adam Smith and is the true father of economics. Okay, well, I got to look up this guy. How much time before Adam Smith did this guy come out? Steve, do you want to come on? You can jump on if you want. I can send you the link. I'd have to get my headphones though. But you're more than well. Oh, you're waiting for George's show. I gotcha. So anybody else seen George Galloway's arrest in Britain, England, UK, Great Britain? Crazy, right? That's crazy. I'd like to know the full story. Right? What else we got here? Let's try to go. I was gonna, like I said, because my baseball game's coming on today. I'm just here for a quick bit to chat to everybody. Yeah, well, it's good to leave them out. This is my giant argument from why Econ 101 ID crap. I don't know what ID means. Is that some like Australian thing? Or you mean it is crap? You put a D. Okay, I got you. Is crap. It isn't what they teach. It's what they don't teach. Yeah, my latest blog on my Patreon, which is basically saying that new Keynesian economics is just a mask for neoclassical economics. So over time, with the critiques of the neoclassicals, they added frictions to their models, et cetera, et cetera. And but in a lot of ways, if you look at econ textbooks 101, and I got 3 of them, right, modern ones, just so I know what I'm dealing with. They perpetuate, they say things, but they don't actually teach. It's not what they actually teach, right? So economics, it's pretty boring when you open up a textbook. What do you think? What do you got, dear? Go Jays, Pet Rock. Here we are. Go Jays. Pet Rock, are you Canadian? I can't remember if you're Canadian. Oh, I think you are, aren't you? But anyways, yeah, big game. Like last game of the season, must win or Yankees must lose. It's going to be, it's in Toronto too. So in that dome they've got 41,000 people, it's going to be popping. Fortunately, I can't have beer during this game because it's going to be Sunday at noon for me, and that's just really problem. It goes into alcoholism if you're drinking on a Sunday afternoon, unless the barbecue's going, right? That can be a problem. You live in Taiwan, yes, but Taiwan. Oh, right. I remember now. Taiwan. I have a friend. Marie and I have a friend from Taiwan. She's become Canadian. Um, Taiwan, interesting place. They love their baseball there in Taiwan. So in Taiwan, they have cheerleaders at their baseball games. Okay, like actual cheerleaders. In Major League Baseball, that's just unheard of, right? It would be is sacrilegious, right, to have cheerleaders because it's a very traditional game, right? The rules, the ethics, the aura, but they have cheerleaders in Taiwan. I almost kind of want to go watch a baseball game in Taiwan. Dear Macro, he kind of put forth the idea of the division of labor by about 400 years. He essentially wrote the Laffer curve as well. Reagan quoted him during tax policy. So I actually did a blog or a thread on the Laffer curve. I'm not a big fan of the Laffer curve or its usefulness because if you look at the curve, right, it's nice. So I don't know which way I'm going here, but you got your y-axis and your x-axis, and then you got your Laffer curve that looks like a horseshoe. It's missing one thing, and that's time, right? So if you had a real Laffer curve with time involved, right, it would be just squiggly. And so the curve itself is hard to be useful in any manner. You guys can just, type in on my X Laffer curve and you'll see my long thread. I might have did an article on it. But I can't remember because I just, Tony, all Econ 101 did was explain what supply versus demand was, and then they showed us different supply versus demand diagrams for different types of markets. All they wanted was for us to recognize market types. True. That's a big thing. I don't even use supply and demand chart because it means that there's some equilibrium you're getting to. And I've had arguments and I've gotten pushback from like conventional economists that time is included in these charts. But really, can you really include time in a two-dimensional chart and you're looking for equilibrium? Like if you hit that equilibrium and then time moves, then one of those curves is shifting at all times. And I don't. You have to basically, in order to reach a move in time, you have to reach a new equilibrium point. So you're jumping your equilibrium, and if you're jumping your equilibrium points, it means you have to have some sort of exogenous shock to the system to jump to the next equilibrium point, and that means time is defined in exogenous shocks. But in the real world, time doesn't behave. It's time is continuous, right? So I just I'm not a I've had arguments with him, and I seem to feel like after these arguments, I've lost because they have a bit of techno babble. You ever watch Star Trek? And let's say the next generation. I'm a 90s, 80s kid, right? So let's say it's the next generation, and Data would have this huge techno babble. It sounds good in acting. It makes you believe in the show, makes you feel like you're in space. It makes you feel like you're part of the Star Trek universe. This is the same thing I get when I talk to conventional economists, right? And I'm really savvy at math. I'm not as good as Tony. I'm not an engineer, top notch building nuclear plants or whatever you do in Australia, Tony. But I'm good at math, right? And they yap, and I feel like Jesus Christ, I must not know very much. Um, but when I look at, supply and demand graphs and I think about applying it to a dynamic system, the whole textbook becomes boring because I can't apply any of it. Like it doesn't seem like a real world system. Imagine I modeled a small conveyor belt, right? And there's feedback systems in the conveyor belt. So if you put too much product on the conveyor belt, it would slow down, right? And then there's a feedback, the motor would get hotter, right? Imagine if I tried to design that with equilibrium supply and demand graphs, two-dimensional graphs. Like I just couldn't see how I could make that work. So I agree with Tony there. What else we got? I know it's a great topic, Dave, but I covered it at the beginning of the show and now we're done. Right? We kind of got to the point, and this is where it always goes, right? No matter what the discussion, if it's about money, currency, um, it always goes to what is wealth. And the problem is, what is wealth is different to each economic school, right? And it's held at wholly level grounds, right? If I tell an Austrian, you're not really telling me anything by a subjective value. You're not telling me anything. You're not, that doesn't give me the ability to know where I'm going in my own personal finances. And it won't allow me to, help with policy decisions. I know Austrians don't like government policy and all that, right? They would lose it on me, and we're not friends anymore. He's unfollowing me on X, right? And I'm alone, right? I'm being sarcastic a bit, but that's the degree it's held at, right? So when it's a conversation about money, and I've seen this over and over because I'll post like David Graeber quotes, right? And all of the negative comments, and you know how social media is. It doesn't bother me any, but it all goes to wealth, right? And each individual person's variation on what wealth is. And trust me, everybody's is different, right? Even from the same school, you will have differences in the opinion of what wealth is to you, right? And that's why when I write about it, I disregard it, I lower it, I demote it in the economic universe because I don't think it serves much purpose, right? If you're gonna talk about if I've got a bigger bank balance now, so I can spend more, just do that. Don't even say I'm wealthier because I've got a bigger bank balance, because then you'll have somebody say, "Oh, well, that's just government inflation," right? That's not wealth, right? Meanwhile, you can spend more, and to you, that's wealth, right? So, like, if I'm in a conversation about modeling, and let's say I want to determine what consumption is going to be for the private sector, and this is very abstract and a basic model. Well, I just that's pretty easy. They can only spend what they have, right, in their bank balance. And you could do something simple like a time constant, right? So you take your bank balance, right? So it's dimensioned in dollars, and then you use a time constant, which is dimensioned in time. So let's say year, it's dimensioned in year. So you go the bank account divided by the time constant equals consumption, right? So you could do stuff like that, and then of course you can add other things. Maybe the interest rate affects, the how much consumption's going on, right? But if I go and say, you know what, consumption's based on wealth, and somebody says, well, what's your definition of wealth? And I say, well, it's what you got in your bank account. You're wealthy. You got more than me. You're wealthier than me, right? But if I said that to a libertarian, they'd lose their fucking shit because none of it's gold, right? And their definition's different, right? And it's not that I disagree with certain definitions of wealth, um, but I accept that people have different views because there is that primal emotion inside of everybody. They might be doing bad in life, so their idea of wealth, is different than somebody else that does have, the resources to do things. And then of course you get into wealth as resources. But Keynes said resources aren't wealth until they're employed, right? So Keynes had a different idea of what wealth is. Sometimes a rock is just a rock. Let's use Sigmund Freud. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but if you smoke it, then it has value. Holy shit. I almost think I came up with my own quote there. Woo! Baseball's almost on, boys. So Keynes' idea of wealth was it didn't have any value if it's just sitting in the ground or it's a rock on them. But once you employed it, then it derived wealth, right? Or we go back to like ecological economics. If you define wealth as something that's environmental, part of the biosphere, then it goes against Keynes because it would say that's great that rock is minerals, is still in the ground, it's still pristine environment, and a wealthy environment around a human makes the human more wealthy, right? So wealth is defined in so many different ways, it becomes counterproductive to use it in an economic conversation, right? It's best just to describe the specific topic you're talking about. So, like when I was talking about consumption, I don't say consumption's based on wealth, it's based on what you have in your bank account, right? Some people might call that, well, that's your wealth in your bank account. Other people won't, right? And you lose, you can't take the conversation any further because now you have these personal ideologies about what wealth is, what a terminology is, what a word is, right? And you can't get to the underlying system, right? To describe, okay, why do people consume, right? And I'm using that as a loose example because what they have in their bank account. Obviously, there are other behaviors that influence that. So let's see what's going on in the chat. Reading Dave. Is that the same as saving for things we want? I don't know. Is that referring to something else in the chat? I'm just going to scroll up. What do you guys talk about these Professor Jing Quinn, fellow Canadian, has a very convincing argument that money makes us perfect slaves, which is slaves that don't ever rebel. Yeah, and that's actually a common even in I don't know if you guys remember the Zeitgeist movies, I think the early 2000s, which I actually was kind of introduced me to the libertarian idea in a conspiracy type way. But anyways, they kind of pushed that idea. So it's been around for a while that money is a covert system of control and thus slavery without violence per se. So it's been around that idea and been and said in many different variations throughout time. If you look at it, here's how I look at it. In a modern, economy, We aren't, I'm not, putting a couple sheep on account, right? And you're giving me some corn and I owe you some money. In a modern sense, we're not doing that. We've got these strong digital money systems, right? Whether it's, the currency of a central government, or the credit systems of the commercial sector or the private sector. We have this strong digital system now, and it's almost invincible, and we just do our lives. We tap our cards, tap our phones, and even before tapping the phones, you had to insert your card into a thing, or you had to go and swipe your card at a bank machine to get currency money, whatever, right? It's very easy, right? And what it's done is it's essentially replaced us going out into the plains with spears and hunting for our food. And in that regard, you could say people that had to do that. So we're going back thousands of years when humans were on the plains with their spears hunting the food they needed. They were slaves to their hunger and their desire to live, right? And then you could say, well, that's just the struggle of life, right? And we're all slaves to the struggle of life. Now we have money, right? And so we've maybe, I don't want to use this word, but maybe we're more civilized, that we have a unit of exchange that lays on top of all that activity, because underneath money, we still got to eat every day, we still got to survive, right? That struggle still exists, but we've got the layer of money on top. And so now we can start getting into ideas where money creates slavery, money is a form of slavery, but really the slavery still underneath the desire to live, right? You are a slave as a biological creature. You're slaving to live further, right? We can use that terminology, right? So that's the way I've often thought about that, because I've heard that, money is a form of slavery, right? And I asked myself, well, what is money and what is its purpose, right? And it's for economic activity in current times, but ultimately it's so you can eat and sleep somewhere safe, right? And survive, right? Those real things you have to do, regardless of money being on top of it. Money is now our way to exchange. We have laws and institutions, right? So if you have a dispute about some of your resources or somebody else's resources, you can go to court, right? And take action, nominal action, et cetera, et cetera. You make contracts that are denominated in dollars, right? So all of it's our way to communicate, essentially, in a modern sense, but it's all based on doing the thing underneath, which is surviving day to day, and we are a slave to that. All creatures are. Doesn't matter if you're human or not, right? And in that sense, you could say it's slavery. And I know it kind of went in a few circles there, but that's an idea, right? What else do we got here? But on the plans, you work for yourself, not a slave. Well, yeah, like, it's nice to because that's, you get into the realm of self-determination, and we could go down another philosophical, train there, that, is the world determined? Like, is the universe determined, right? And we're so small in that universe that you think you're making choices, but really it's determined, right? It's kind of like dynamic systems, right? Or do your choices shape the future, your future, and people's around you? So you can get a little bit emotional around that, right? um what I meant about slavery is, I, I should maybe question if I should use that word, because we were talking about how money is slavery, right? And I was saying what really exists underneath money is the actual economic activity, or the actual spearing of the prey on the plain so you could eat that night. You are a slave as a biological creature to life, going through time. Because you don't do those things, time will stop for you, because you will be dead. So, and essentially, you are a slave to time, right? And money is the illusion of time that's now added over time, over, the realities of actual biological living, right? And biological living is dimensioned in time, right? And so you're a slave to time. in order to keep getting more time. Anyways, Steve Hummel. The heart of the problem is the current monopoly monetary for the creation and distribution of all new money, which is only debt. Well, it depends how you look at debt, right? In the private sector, a commercial bank creating debt, right, and then charging interest on it, for somebody to go out and be economically, active, that's problematic because then they got to pay it back. And you could say, well, that person could have just been active without the middleman there, right? They had the desire to be an entrepreneur, right? They had the desire to eat, right, and move forward in time, right? But if you look at like government debt, it's just a number on a ledger, right? It's just created, like, there's no penalty. Um, I know an Austrian will argue with me. There's no penalty for giving net financial assets to the private sector. Um, it's just an entry, an entry on balance sheets, right? So they're just contributed. They're giving you a free means of exchange for you to go be an entrepreneur in the private sector, right? They're not charging you interest for that. They might need to tax some back, but that's a different story. What else do we got in here? I almost got to go, guys. I can only do an hour-long stream today. Got to get ready for this baseball game. I just wanted to say hi. I know each day stream. So the Sunday stream, I've got a select group of people. The Tuesday stream, I got a select group of people. The stream I do Friday with Steve, a select group of people. So I just want to make sure my select group of people on Sunday. I hear you. I hear you. If I ever run for being a politician, I expect you to move to Canada, get your citizenship, and vote for me. Michael, I've seen you before. I haven't seen you in a while. What do you think of the U.S. Genius Act that regulates stable coins, presumably to prop up the U.S. dollar? I don't know much about it. I haven't even heard of the act. Is this it? Oh, is that the new Trump thing that he was talking about a few weeks ago? Tell me more about it, Michael, or anybody else that knows, because I haven't looked into it. I don't want to talk about something that I don't know. I am, guys. I just want you to know I don't know everything. I don't, right? And somebody in my household reminds me of that all the time. So I just want to put that out there. But let me know what that is. Okay, you got these huge names. Okay? And so I will Dr. Kalishnikov. Oh, that's like a AK? Wow. I appreciate you, Dr. Kalishnikov. You asked Steve. I'm good at math. Big names, probably not so good, especially names that aren't Canadian, like Bob and James, Jack, Tyler, John, Steve. If they're not generic names like that. Okay, Steve. I gotta end the stream pretty soon anyways. I'll talk to you later. Hopefully you get all your categories organized on your YouTube channel soon. And we'll see Steve on Friday. So he'll be on the Friday live stream. Take it easy, Steve. What else do we got here? Reading Dave. We might not know everything, but we all know something. Yep. I'm going to use that line in every live stream now, Reading Dave. Thank you. That's huge. Okay, so Tony's saying something about it. For starters, anything labeled as a genius in American politics should be regarded with extreme caution. Yes, I agree with Tony. Tony and I may not always agree on things, but we agree on some things, and that we agree on. Dear point. Sorry, off topic, but I gotta make fun of the J Stadium for a second 41,000 K people is like half the size of most college football stadiums. Okay, so in Major League Baseball, the trend has that sport has struggled. Like, so I can't remember how old you're, probably in your around your 30s. You're around my age. I'm 41. So when we were kids, baseball was a lot more popular, right? The NFL was up there and college football was rising and college basketball, but baseball suffered, and it suffered since the 95 strike, right? Attendance, that was the first real nail in the coffin for baseball. So a lot of stadiums, the new ones, are building them smaller and smaller, right? And thankfully, because it was a Sky Dome in Toronto before, I think it was close to 60,000 before. And so it was that old fashioned 1980s, 1970s round concrete lifeless dome, right? So you had your upper deck, middle deck, and lower deck. And they did the renos over the last 2 years, and they reduced some of the seating, but they put like little bars and cafes because they couldn't have the village outside of the stadium because it's just constrained so much there. And it looks a lot better. So I don't know if you've seen any of the Jays games in their new stadium. And yeah, it's in a dome, and a retractable dome, and it's the first in history. So it's not like the nice dome down in Houston where you've got the glass window, or even in Miami where you've got the glass window out in left field. It still feels like you're in a dome, right? It feels like the old King Dome in Seattle, except the roof retracts. But they did a lot of work because it was a multi-use stadium before. It did a lot of work to just make it feel like a baseball diamond now. So the atmosphere is a lot better, and to see them be in the playoffs, it's going to be exciting to see them in that new venue. What else we got here? Springer Dinger. And we got Guzman. So I guess we'll end this on sports, and we'll probably lose all the followers. A message hidden, undo or choose another. What does it say? I don't know. Hope I didn't hide anybody's message accidentally there. If I did, I apologize. It just popped up there saying I hit a message. Let's go. Springer Dinger. Guzman, complete game. Shutout. Kirk triples. Kirk got a home run in yesterday's game. He's back, baby. He's back. Alexander Kirk was an all-star this year. I know a lot of people don't in the chat probably don't know a lot about baseball. He's had a great year, but kind of got cold. Guerrero's a little bit cold right now. What's going to be interesting, and the Blue Jays wanted to avoid this, and Pat Rock, you'll know, right? They don't want, the problem is if they lose today and the Yankees win, they use Guzman up today. They don't have Guzman for the first game of a wild card series, right? A potential 3-game series, right? And that means they have to go with Scherzer. And he's getting kind of, well, there's that one start where he let in 7 runs. I think it was in KC. That was pretty bad. And his last one, he let in 4 runs in the first inning. So that's a little iffy. Barrios, I know they put him down in the bullpen. And I thought, man, I don't know if you want to do that. Now you got Bassett, he's injured, and now Barrios is on the IL too, so he's just gone. And there's a lot of headwinds, and then of course Bichette is on the IL. But now both him and Bassett are supposed to come back for an AL division series, so that's why we really need the win today or a Yankee loss. I'm talking Big Ten. Vast majority of those are 70 plus and around. Yeah, baseball is just not popular enough. Like you could do it like for big like weekly games. The problem is there's 162 games in baseball during the week in the middle of the day when people are at work. So even a great ball club might only get 10,000, 15,000 people for that day. And so if you have those big, like if you had a big 80,000 seat stadium, which you could do in baseball. You could have it would be dull and empty, and it's the cost of maintaining that. So I guess they just don't see the value in it in the atmosphere. So you've seen those numbers come down, right? Because they play a number of games. Now, if baseball was once a week and it was like a weekly event, maybe they could get the numbers and it was on a weekend like the NFL. Um, anyways, we've gone off into baseball. I think we achieved our money conversation in the first 20 minutes. Then we got into philosophy, which is always fun. And now we're into baseball. So we've fallen way off topic here. But okay, dear point. Let's see what you got to say here. College stadiums are massive, but even the NFL stadiums are much nicer. But if you look at the Battery Brave Stadium is 46,000, but Battery Rogers Stadium, but I'm a Braves fan, so I'm not bragging. Yeah, I don't know. This Jays, you know, you got to remember they're in a snow country, so they got to close the roof. I don't mind having less seats. I'd rather see a full sold out stadium with less seats because the atmosphere is better, right? Um, and as for fans, well, depends on what market you're in, right? You go watch. Well, look at Tampa Bay. The struggles they have to fill up the Trop, which is a dome stadium. Well, not right now. It's not domed. If anybody knows of the hurricane, so they had a fabric roof on the on that dome for anybody that's not in North America. And a hurricane came along, ripped it off. So they've been playing in the Yankees spring training stadium all season. And the Blue Jays go down there and we struggle so bad. It's like we don't know how to play in a minor league park. It's terrible to watch. We're playing the Tampa Bay right now, and we're doing good. We won the first 2 games in the series. So anyways, let's try to finish off with something economic. PCE versus CPI. I do favor PCE for judging inflation as it's far less manipulated, as it simply reflects what the typical consumer deems to spend. What's your opinion on it? I agree. I agree. I don't mind like CPI when I'm looking at like price inflation and price level changes. I'll often look at like industrial indexes too. I just won't look at CPI because it's just a broad number and it's not a reflection of what could be happening causally. So if input costs have gone up, that's important to me because that leads me to believe consumer costs will go up in the future. So when it comes to looking at price dynamics, CPI is a flashy number that people love to show. It makes news headlines. But if you're a statistician or you're an economic model or you're looking at like other cost changes, especially like input costs, right? Because that's a leading indicator of what consumer prices could be in the future, right? You're looking at supply bottlenecks. You're looking at like order sheets, right? So unfulfilled order sheets. So like what's on order, right? And what's being fulfilled instead of the final numbers, which are just out of for the US, that's out of the business and labor statistics, right? Which a lot of it's just surveys and estimations, right? And you can look at the specific surveys and estimations yourself and start digging into that data. And Deer Point Macro, I know, does a little bit of that. Now we'll go back into a baseball question. But to your point, Ty, I think baseball is kind of died down. Last thing on econ, would love to hear your thoughts sometimes on physical theory of price level sometime. Well, that's a deep conversation, but I should cover it. I'm assuming you're kind of asking, what the effect of, government spending has on the price level. I'm assuming. And maybe I should cover that. It would be a long I'd run into my baseball game going down that that line of thinking with you. Actually, in that case, if we ever do discuss that, you'll just have to hop on the stream, and we'll discuss it at length. Because I know a lot of people like that. I have some idea. So there's the MMT. No, I should say the neo-chartalist view. That I don't necessarily fully agree with. And that's where the government's setting the price level. So, for instance, if you hire a military soldier for $50,000 a year, you're setting the price level for that resource, right? And then that price level for anybody comparable in the private sector, that's you're setting the price level, right? So there's that, but I find it abstract. And it kind of leaves out like the Koleski, like cost plus markup situation, which is another dynamic. And this is much like when I was talking about wealth, how there's different theories of wealth that maybe if one was determined enough, clever enough, maybe famous enough so people would actually listen to him, they could create a dynamic model to qualitatively prove aspects of wealth. Same with this, right? If somebody was clever enough, determined enough, and popular enough, there could be empirical, models, on, physical theory and the price level. But I'm not popular enough. I'm not determined. And I'm not smart enough. I'm thinking about, remember wrestling, Kurt Angle and the three eyes? Intensity, intelligence, and something else. That's what I'm thinking about right now. Oh, geez. Anyways, I gotta go watch a baseball game, guys. It was fun. We had a little chat. I'll see you. So Zoe Lindsay, you may see her in the chat. She's one of my Patreon members. She sent me a video to react to, and I didn't even scan through this one. So I'm going to be doing that on Tuesday. I don't know if it's going to be good or not. I don't know if it's going to be like a reaction type video. But obviously, if you're a paid Patreon member and you send me videos, I'm gonna cater to you. So we'll react to that on Tuesday, and then Friday I'll be back with Steve Keed, Mike Radzicki, and Dave Folks. Until then, bye-bye.
You are now relearning economics.